My name is Bernardo Gonzalez. I'm the CTO of Televisa Interactive Media. This is the group in Televisa responsible for the distribution and production of content in this format, in digital. I've been working for the company for the past 13 years, and we have been evangelizing the market in Mexico. In the early days, we started as a horizontal portal, just with content. Then we launched the first music store in the country, very successful, but for very little time. And then we launched another successful SMS business, like in the distribution of the content for feature phones, you know, the ringtones, the pictures, which is still running on the company. And we have been doing, trying to do a lot of innovation. You know, we don't see ourselves as a company that is producing technology, but we are heavily users of technology. We are always looking for providers and the innovations in the market and finding ways to implement it. We also released the first linear channel services in the country in 2007. So that's basically what we do in our group.
Great. Kevin?
Thanks, Bernardo. I'm Kevin Egan, and I'm working on online commerce for Microsoft. I'm Vice President of e-commerce for Microsoft Direct Channels. I've been at Microsoft a while. I actually learned a lot from Mike Maples Sr., and may share some of what his lessons have been in helping Microsoft pivot a couple of times in its history to deal with otherwise what would have been very disruptive innovation from outside of our company. And I think we're in the middle of one of those pivots at the moment. And I really appreciate the invitation today. I want to thank Lynn and I want to thank Jeff, and look forward to sharing some thoughts and really being a student of what really is a really amazing learning group of people here, and learned a lot so far today. Hope it continues.
Great. My name's Karen Richardson. I'm a software executive from Silicon Valley. I spent time, my last company was a software company called Epiphany. Prior to that, I was at Netscape. Currently, I sit on a number of boards, both public companies and private companies, and I live part-time here in Punta Mita. So thanks for including me.
You already know me, so.
Fantastic, guys. Okay, so I want to let's start off with a couple of discussion questions for the panel, and then let's quickly move into any questions we have from the audience. But I think the first one and the most important here is I'd love to get a sense from you guys as to really what are the kind of the must-have components of a high-performing digital innovation culture from your perspective. Who wants to take it? Jump ball.
I'll start. So a couple things. And I'll just mention one of the boards I sit on is a large telecommunications company, BT, British Telecom. And you can imagine that at a company like that, innovation is incredibly important. It is in every company, I think, but certainly in a large telecommunications company, and particularly one that's been around for over 150 years, and used to be owned by the government. So it's only been privatized for fewer than 20 years. And I would say one thing is critically important, and that is that innovation in general and digital as a subset of that needs to be pervasive in the company. It can't just be something that's off in one part of the organization in R&D. It can't be something that only some people are chartered to be the innovators in the company or at low levels of the organization. If that's the case, I would submit you won't wind up, particularly if you're a large company, with a very innovative culture. So it needs to be pervasive in the way that you behave across the organization. So that means in the way that you hire, the way that you recruit, the way that you reward and compensate your employees, what management talks about, walking the walk and talking the talk about the importance. And finally, the board of directors needs to be putting their money where the mouth is. So if innovation is important, and I believe it is to most companies, if not all companies, then you need to make sure that you are making the investments that show the employees that innovation and the emphasis around innovation, and we're talking about, let's say, in the digital world, is important. And if you talk the talk but don't actually put your money where your mouth is, your employees figure that out. They get disenfranchised, and I think that's the beginning of the end, in my view.
I'd like to build on Karen's answer, because clearly her experience is at the very top of some very successful organizations. As someone who hasn't been at the top of an organization like those, let me tell you how it feels to an innovation change maker inside of a big company. And the things that you really appreciate over years of seeing things that succeed and fail is when you have leadership at the very top that has the courage to go against the grain of what in large companies becomes a race towards operational efficiency. And that focus on operational efficiency, while important, can absolutely kill innovation. Allowing for a culture that can be tolerant of mistakes is essential if you're going to build a learning and a rapid learning organization. And that takes courage. If you're an investor, well, you don't want to hear about a quarter that went down. If you're an investor in Tesla right now, you probably are concerned about the short-term stock performance. But go read the blog posting that Elon Musk posted an hour ago, and you'll see courage in leadership in the face of innovation challenges. And so I'm going to just, to that particular answer, there's many other components, but as someone who wants to be a change agent, to hire people, motivate them towards a cause, that requires tremendous courage at the very top of the company. And then for people who really just get in the trenches, and I do think I'm one of those people, it's really this sense of customers having wow moments that just satisfy you, that cause whether you're in a user lab and you're watching it, get out in the wilds, as you described, Jeff, and you watch people, there's something that has to be satisfying in the culture to just see the moment of enlightenment, inspiration, problem solving in the face of whether it's a student, a child, or an information worker, one of the customers we solve. It really has to reward what the company or the individual or the teams take satisfaction in.
Bernardo?
Yes, I agree. And in Televisa, since this is a massive company, one of the challenges that we have is that when we try to innovate in something, we usually have the mass and we have all the traffic. And the challenges that we have is to make a business sense of this. We need to bring the money, the resources into the company with the advertisers. At the beginning, I said that we were evangelizing the market, and this is probably our current challenges. For example, in sports, when we do something new, a novelty in the soccer, we bring the audiences. The challenge is how to spread this into many advertisers and make a business sense.
I think I'll round it off by saying what we see in back to that point of what got you here won't get you there. Well, what's underneath that is most companies just incremental themselves to something. You know, it's not about a better search box on an e-commerce site or a website. It's about, so you're not re-engineering, but you're trying to reimagine. And getting that type of culture into the executive team, even if it's in a startup, how do you reimagine the next wave of that solution that you're building? Most people just iterate on it, just incrementality to themselves. So it's putting that view of not re-engineering, but fundamentally reimagining what that solution looks like. I think John kind of showed you all of those technologies that they came up with 10 years ago, and look now where it is. I think we have a lot of startups that say, how do I build a better Facebook? That's not going to win. How do I build a better Tumblr? That's not going to win. How do I build a better Groupon? That's not going to win. They're not going to win, period. But, you know, that there is definitely things about how do you think, both in whether you're a startup or a large corporation, about how do I not re-engineer, but reimagine the solution.
Yeah, and I think, Kevin, you know, you articulated that point, too, about having courage. I think that it, you know, again, in large companies, a lot of times people don't have the courage to think about cannibalizing their own businesses with new breakthrough innovative ideas. You know, it's very, very hard to imagine disappointing Wall Street investors. And sometimes, you know, big, bold moves take, number one, not just young people, because I think the idea that, oh, I just got to hire a bunch of young people and I'm going to have an innovative culture or an innovative digital culture is completely wrong. I think, you know, you need people with it helps, I think, to have some knowledge and experience while you're coming up with these courageous ideas, and then know how to handle them when mistakes happen, as you talked about, right? And I think people with experience actually are better served at doing that sometimes than necessarily younger folks are. But again, I think in particularly in big companies, the courage thing is really oftentimes lacking.
Kevin, you and I had a pretty fascinating conversation at lunch about some of the other dimensions that you see kind of essential to ensuring a digital culture, and an effective one at that. You want to comment on a few more of those?
And thanks for lunch, too. Well, I've been at Microsoft a long time, and yet I've been a serial entrepreneur, 25 years, and every 5 years I've had the pleasure of starting some new business inside of what seemed like a company that wasn't sure what the next pivot would be. And one of the great leaders who was so pleasing to sit in the back row today and see Mike Maples get up and talk is that his father joined Microsoft in 1988 after a long, successful career at IBM, and it was a pretty big, courageous thing for him to do, and taught a lot of us fundamentals that still are timeless. They don't change, whether it's digital, analog, service, operations. The first was, and a lesson that I'll share that I think is part of the culture that he brought, that has inspired, I think, hundreds and thousands of people who've gone on to run successful companies. Number one is, if you want to be a member of the best team in the world, don't be a member of a team that believes that second place is okay. That pick a challenge where you believe that first place is your destination, is the thing that you will move mountains for. And it has to have that righteous goal, that exponential thinking, as we heard earlier. So that was something that many of us took to heart, and it was hard as the company grew. That how do you pick things when you've had successes where you still can go and have a righteous destination to be the number one? And number one in customers' minds. Sometimes that's market share, sometimes that's sales. But at the heart of it, what sustains is number one in customers' sense of who serves me best. The second thing that he really taught a lot about that's important for entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs inside companies is your reputation over time is your only asset in a world that changes so frequently that experience, unfortunately, becomes, I think, a hindrance to really being an innovation leader. And the reputation has to be one of a leader who says what they'll do and does it. That if you say you will do something, you have to do it. And that's really hard in a culture of ideas, because we use ideas as a sounding board. And if you're talking to the operational teams, and you have to be crystal clear about what you set as your goals and what you say you will do, and over time, doing what you say you will do, even if it results in failure, is more important than not being able to stand on your reputation. You have to stand on that reputation. There's a few other lessons that may come up in the context of the discussion, but I think given Karen's experience and the rest of the panel, I'd love to learn from them as well.
Absolutely. So let's pause here. Does the audience have reactions or questions at this point? Things you want to throw out there to this group? Or do you guys just want to stand up and stretch? Okay, we've got a mountain of other questions here, so please don't hesitate to speak up if you do want some additional insights from the group. But so one of the things that we started talking about here earlier, and I think most folks on this panel will have some experience with, is just this whole notion of, in a lot of cases, there's these digitally native organizations that in some way, shape, or form ultimately become a part of a larger organization. And it's an exciting moment, I'm sure, for those entrepreneurs that drove those activities, and it's an exciting moment for the leadership teams that are bringing them in as a part of an acquisition or as a part of a partnership, a joint venture, et cetera. I think the biggest fear a lot of those folks would have is how do I make sure that this transition goes well and we're not squashing the entrepreneurial vision, the digital culture that came along with it. And so what advice would you guys have to the leadership from some of these other larger organizations who are faced with those particular situations?
Well, a couple things. I think in the case of large companies, I think you need to figure out if you're a good acquirer or not. And quite frankly, some companies are just not. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't learn how to be better, but my personal view is if a large corporate figures out that they don't, where they're standing today, is not particularly adept at buying young, innovative startups and integrating them into the company, then they're best to not do it until they figure out what they're doing wrong. Because the worst thing you can do is go waste a lot of money and get a reputation that then follows you around, and young entrepreneurs don't want to sell to you because of what you do. So that's point number one. Figure out if you're good at it, and if you're not, pause, take a minute, figure out, do an assessment, figure out what's wrong, and then try to address it before you go back into the M&A route. It was one thing I would suggest. The second thing is there are very large companies that are really good serial acquirers, and in some cases, that doesn't always mean that it's great for the target company that's being acquired. I mean, Cisco is a great acquirer, right? But they do it the Cisco way. And it's the Cisco way or the highway. And so you come in, and they have a process, and their process is defined over the last 20 years. And I don't think that they stifle per se. I'm not sure if they stifle the innovation, but they buy things because they want that asset in their portfolio, and they buy it, and they stick it through the Cisco process. And they do it very effectively from a financial point of view, and they have a set of people they want to keep, and they have a set of people they don't want to keep. And that's sort of what they do. And it works very well for them from a perspective of meeting their commitments to their shareholders over the long haul. Now, if you're an entrepreneur in one of those companies, I'm not sure you want to be at Cisco for the rest of your life, but I'm not sure you were going to want to be at a big company anyway, so I'm not sure that's bad. So I guess what I'm saying is I think there are very large companies that are poor at acquisitions, and they need to pause and figure out what they're doing wrong. I think there are companies that are very good at it, but that doesn't necessarily mean being good at it from a perspective of meeting certain objectives necessarily is going to work for the people who love being in young, small, nimble organizations, because big companies have to have processes and procedures. So, I mean, those are just at least two examples I would give you of things to think about.
Great examples. Bernardo, from your perspective?
Yes, well, what we are doing is we are living in a transition within the company. In the past 4 years, or before that time, we were responsible for managing all the digital strategy in the company. And since 2009 until today, we are transferring all this knowledge and all this process into the core business of the company. And it has been a very interesting process because at the beginning, you know, the guys from the TV, media, heavy industry, they said, you are cannibalizing our audience. This is not going to work, or the money is not there because, you know, with the digital media at the beginning, it's really hard to prove that. In sports, we started this transition in 2009, and they really understand this, and they are promoting very actively. They use technology really heavily. In other areas, we are just working on that, like in entertainment. We have so many producers. These are creative guys, and they are in the process to try to push and understand and use all the digital media.
In terms of the challenges of scaling up from startup into company scale or acquiring, one of the elements that I see that is much more characteristic of the successful scale up or startup is impedance matching the energy that a startup environment has in the organization that you're trying to make it a part of. And the thing that attracts entrepreneurs and attracts creative people and attracts the high energy idea people to teams and organizations and purpose is an unfettered enthusiasm for discovery, for learning, and for sharing. And if that impedance match of that energy and the systems you build around that for decision making, for valuing customers, for getting out and learning, for doing things that in an operational organization you don't do. Experiential learning is oftentimes not part of mature organizational processes, but a critical part of a startup and an entrepreneurial process. And so the leadership really needs to look at the onboarding teams or the scale-up management and create an impedance match of enthusiasm, values, customer centricity, and IQ. Because you've got to find, not IQ off the charts, but in terms of the thinking model and what you value in terms of what smart means to your company.
Jeff, do you have perspectives having changed and innovated within the context of management consulting, bringing Booz Digital in?
Well, we were a 23-person organization when we got acquired, so and then we went into a 3,300-person organization, and we're an agile shop, and most consulting is a very linear process. You know, I do a strategy phase, and then I give it to the design phase, and then the build phase, operate phase, and transfer. So for us, it was helping our own company become an agile shop and really thinking about how do you iterate to come to innovate versus follow a linear process. And I think that is, we've introduced the oblong tools that we have, which has created a way as technology is an enabler, not a driver, but an enabler of innovation. And then we've found ways to use that technology to allow our clients to be innovative, because even consulting has been, I think, bastardized down into staff augmentation. And we're not staff augmentation. Every one of the guys that works for me are operators. So, we've built businesses. I actually ran a sporting goods a retailer that was $3 billion, not even knowing that. So, but I think that is the point that we were trying to do, is just ensure that culture of innovation. And if you think about, we're kind of a startup, and then most acquisitions don't work. Most mergers destroy value. They don't create value. Most startups don't work. Most ideas don't get funded. I mean, and if you look at corporate America provides the third largest exit strategy for startups. The first one is you never get funded. The second one is you fail. The third one is you get bought by a corporation. And the fourth one, which is a distant fourth, is an IPO. So, I mean, understanding how to create a culture in your own startup that will fit within a larger company is also important, that I think is a lot of times overlooked, because that is going to be your exit. That is going to be the exit, even if you get venture cap, that's going to be the exit that they're going to need. And thinking both from your own startup, which we thought hard and long about how will we fit into that culture, and then what changes do we need to make to that culture so that we can grow correctly. And we've grown at a, we've grown at a 10x rate over the last year, and now represents 6% of the firm's revenue. So.
Follow-up comments, guys?
Well, one about whether it's a transformation initiative you have, and first I have to say I have firsthand experience with seeing Booz Digital's process. And for a company like Microsoft, the historical context can be, boy, it's awfully hard to integrate innovation from external. Let's invent it here. Boy, look how expensive it would be to bring in specialists to do something. We can do that ourselves. And that's a trap to companies that don't have resource constraints to just spin up their own efforts. And so I think being in this world of accelerated change and the sea changes that are happening, not just from digital, but in other areas, you really are going to have a more open culture of embracing, partnering, using specialized services, and that's a critical part of what I think is helping keep us finger on the pulse. Last comment that I would have is, I don't think it's digital that's the spark that is causing the disruption in many companies or their concerns over their viability or the need to transform. Digital is just a tool. It's just the current set of technology so that close the gap between maker and consumer. And the real transformation is more timeless, and it's a subtle transformation to really fully embrace the consumer or the customer at the core of every job function, not just in design, but in marketing, in sales, in support, in engineering. And that's a pervasive transformation that isn't because of digital. Digital might be making that easier to do, but it really is embracing the customer and everything that means, walking in their shoes, taking 100% accountability for their experience, not just the UX or the UI, but everything that wraps your product. And it's this focus on complete customer experience. Whether you build it or you rely on someone else to deliver it or someone else to sell it, you own it. And that's the transformation I think that's causing the most fundamental shifts in many companies in many industries.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, because I think people sometimes they use technology as a reason to make excuses for why they're not successful. Oh, I didn't have a good online strategy, or my e-commerce, initiative failed, we didn't fund it correctly or whatever. And to me, those are just excuses, because again, digital, is just a set, again, of, as Kevin says, it's just technology. It's the way in which we're accomplishing the things we are today. And there are certain, and it's not to say that you shouldn't pay attention to it, but I think it oftentimes is used more as an excuse for why people are failing. And if they really step back and say, no, fundamentally the core of my business is to do X, and again, keeping the customer at the center of it, I think people will be more successful. And yeah, they'll deploy digital strategies and they'll promote innovation, and but they'll promote innovation not just around digital strategies, let's say, as an example. They'll promote innovation around new ways to serve the customer, new ways to support the customer, new ways to do things in the call center, boring, mundane things like that. Because really, I think the best organizations are the ones that, again, have innovation pervasive in the way that they do everything, not just the core product that they ship to the customer, but the way they serve the customer, the way that they run the company, everything. But again, I think you only get that if you sort of, management drives that kind of overreaching culture, if that makes some sense.
You just got to keep your eye on the ball.
Lots of
the
balls.
Customer. Lots of balls,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, but
The
if you
most
think about
important
it, the most important one's who your customer, who's the one who pays the bills, right?
Exactly.
Then it becomes more simple.
That's been the biggest aha for us, is that so many of our engineers for years thought, let's use technology to reduce the dependency on human beings, which somehow are less efficient and they cost more. What we're learning is a critical insight, and as we focus on customer-centered business and customer-centered roles, is technology is really a tool to make it easier to create cost-effective personal relationships. And so using, whether it's e-commerce technology, not to have an anonymous robot recommending products, but to really use the tools to create connection. And we're seeing tremendous, look at Amazon in the launch of Mayday. The ability to, at scale, create a human being one click away. I mean, those are experiences that show that technology is not about separating us from the customer, but it's about closing the distance and enabling relationships.
Well, and Mayday is a great example, because if there was one successful e-commerce company that in fact did something which was considered groundbreaking and really rude actually when they did it, which was Amazon when they launched, you couldn't get a human on the phone when you had a problem. There was no customer support phone number, and they were really the only large enterprise that had a policy of, no, we're going to direct you to the website, and the website's going to be so good, the experience is going to be so good, you're never going to need. And they themselves have cannibalized that successful strategy by this Mayday function on the Kindle. And I think it's because a company like Amazon, again, back to courage, is willing to cannibalize its own brilliant ideas to the point that they woke up and said, you know what, we're now in consumer hardware devices with Kindle. We're not just an e-commerce retailer anymore. And they're complex, and customers might need and want, in their own time when they want it, immediate customer support. And so we're going to make that available to them in this way. And that was a huge thing. And I think it's amazing that the first time that a feature like that launched, it launched from somebody that used to have no mechanism for you to do customer support other than just online. And so anyway, to me, that's an example of real smart thinking and courage around a set of strategies.
Now
to
the
things
fast
we've been talking
followers
about.
are going to apply that to education
Oh, yeah.
and medicine and other
Everything.
areas where
Yeah.
the gap is going to create a complete disruption.
Right. I mean, the good news is I think customer support is going to be massively transformed, and Mayday is like the tip of an iceberg of how customer support will ultimately be benefiting all of us in 5 to 10 years.
Sounds great, guys. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming in and sharing your perspectives on this.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, guys. That was a really fascinating panel discussion, and thank you, Karen. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeff, especially for being a part of this event, and Karen, we just can't tell you enough how glad we're happy to have you involved with Mita, so thank you so much. Well, the past two panel discussions actually set us up nicely for our next speaker. We have a real special treat. Focusing on human-centered design, on the design process, and then building on a culture of innovation. We have a guy that, a real entrepreneur at heart, won the Tour de France 3 times. He won the Tour de France 2 times after a hunting accident put a number of lead pellets in his chest and in his heart. And a guy that really pioneered as an early adapter, and in some cases as an innovator in the cycling industry. And then he launched a very well-known bicycle brand that became a premier brand. And, we sort of know a little bit about what happened after the story, but in the true fashion of an entrepreneur, that passion that just keeps driving and driving and driving, he relaunched his bike brand this year with a very successful partnership. So I'd like to welcome up to the stage. We're going to do a little interview format here with the 3-time Tour de France winner and what would you call him, CEO, founder of Le Mans Bicycles, up to the stage. So thanks for being with us here, Greg. You like the lead pellets? Steel, right? I guess it's
That's lead. No, it's lead.
Here.
So I weigh a lot more now because I have lead pellets in me.
Good for scuba diving.
It looks like fat, but it's really just lead.
Well, Greg, so first of all, thank you for coming here. I know you have a long history with Mexico. In fact, you've even raced in Mexico. So just to put a little bit of your connection to Mexico in context, I'm just going to let you, before we get into the innovation and the whole rest of the design process, just I want the audience to know that you're somebody that really knows this country.
Well, I've been here quite a few times, and when I started bike racing, I grew up in Reno and Lake Tahoe, and San Francisco area is where I raced almost every weekend. And the first family I met was the Jacombs, and they came from, the father, Otto, came from Mexico, and we became lifelong friends. And actually his dad, the dad, Alex is the son, Otto actually worked for me for the last 8 years of my cycling career. But when we met him, we went down and raced at 16. I went to Monclova, raced a race there, raced in Tijuana, Chiapas, Vuelta to Mexico. But I'm the only one that would eat tacos off the street. Everybody's afraid. I love, Mexican food. I think the culture here is so great. Even that if you go inland, the colonial towns are as beautiful as anything in Spain or Europe. So it's quite a contrast. You go to America and you always think, it's amazing that you can go down to Mexico and actually get a European experience 2 hours away.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well,
Well,
and the weather here is great.
Yeah.
Surfing's good here. I own a property here.
That's right. That's right. So we were just talking about creating a culture of innovation, and in the context of the previous panel, they were really talking about a culture of digital innovation. But we're trying to focus our message, towards large corporations in these last couple of panel conversations to show that they really can engage with the entrepreneur ecosystem or you become more innovative and benefit from that. Now I just want to use one example, and we're going to talk a little bit about cycling, and then we want to get into the advances that you've done in the industry itself. But I know that you were at the avant-garde of a lot of cycling innovations, one of which were the aero bars.
Well, I always like to say
Early
I have an
adopter.
open mind, and I see stuff that could be really good. And that came, it comes from my background, probably curiosity in cycling. Cycling is a blend of human and machine, and I think I always say if you didn't like equipment, you would be a runner. So in cycling, it's always been, how do you get a lighter bike? How do you get more aerodynamic? And how do you use equipment just for better performance? I was the first guy to ever see the Oakley prototype, which was a rough prototype. They were a goggle company, not even into glasses. And because cycling was just coming up, they offered me it's the worst business decision I've ever made, but Jim Gennard had no money, so we kind of looked into it, and we asked for $25,000 a year for 3 years versus 10% of Oakley and a royalty. He's mortgaged his house to give you the $75,000 up front because we didn't think they were going to be in business. But it wasn't like I just thought it was a great product. So, I didn't invent it. I was just open to, nobody actually wore sunglasses in cycling. And then Giro helmets was a deal where it was a guy that, Giro, all the hard shell helmets you see today were really started in 1985 in my living room. My son's here, Jeff. But I had a friend, Jim Gentes, who started Giro, and he was copying an aerodynamic helmet that I was racing on the year before, and came to me with an offer to partner up on this really thick styrofoam. It was safe. It passed all these ANSI Snell tests, but it weighed 3 pounds, and I'm like, no way would I wear that. You couldn't pay me enough to wear this in the Tour. I'm competitive, and it's not really about money when you're racing, trying to win the Tour de France. And I had bought a Baby Bell for my son at Target store. And it passed the test, and it weighed nothing. And we literally drew an outline of air vents on it. And 6 months later, I wore it in the Tour, and he had like 20,000 orders within 3 weeks. But it was just to happen. But it was more just being open with the tri bars. I didn't invent it. I know the friend, the guy who did.
No, I didn't say that you invented it, but what I meant was
I saw it used by somebody else, and I'm like, that's an advantage. That's a big advance in positioning.
But you met with a little bit of resistance in the cycling industry for that, because that was a little controversial even back then, using the aero bars. I think Fignon was actually offered the same.
The irony is, I was racing. I grew up in the United States, didn't know anything about the Tour de France, and within 4 years, I was racing on the Olympic team, racing in France, and won a race. Got an offer to race professionally with the biggest team at the time, Renault, and they had access to the Formula One wind tunnel. So we had everything you see today that's so, what you believe is new was already there in 1982, 83. Weighs a little bit more. So I had a really good opportunity with somebody that, a coach and a team that was very advanced in their thinking, And that same coach was Fignon, who was the guy who lost the Tour de France in '89. They actually got the team. The same team in '84 was refused with some fairings on the bike. I had the aero bars approved, and at the very last day, they had the bars too, and they chose not to use them. I chose to use them, and won by 8 seconds. But
So
it was,
are we saying that the French
I didn't-
could learn something about a
no,
culture
they
of
just,
innovation
it was,
as well?
the
Okay.
irony is that the same team that was very open, they closed their minds to it. They actually thought it'd hurt your breathing. They didn't realize it was that much faster aerodynamically.
Well, okay, so let's go back to the focus on human design, and I just, I imagine that in the sporting industry, that's probably one of the best examples where everything just has to fit the human form. So when you see design in any product, including some of the products that you're coming out with, what's the emphasis and what's the process that you guys go through in testing the design against the human form?
It's me. I'm not really. This is really technology centered. I love technology, but I don't know anything about it, so I'm a really good guinea pig. So if it works for me, it works for everybody. But I'm really into ergonomics, design, and that's where you come from cycling. You have to race 6 hours a day for 3 weeks straight, or 6 hours a day for 5 days a week for most of the year. So ergonomics, how your hands go on stuff, how you shift, and it really never changed up until the 80s, and 80s till, say, the mid-90s. There was huge changes, and it's still an antiquated industry, really. They still are stuck on the same derailleur, same brake form, which is stuff I want to change. There's still not people looking at it from a human use. I mean, people have shoulder problems, arm problems, but it's also just poor positioning. But the product also hasn't changed in 20, 30 years. So but it's a sport that's really actually quite advanced. I was thinking of all the sports that I can't think of many sports that have as much testing in terms of physiological testing. We're one of the few sports that, I was using a heart rate monitor in 1984. In the early 90s, there was a German engineer that came out with strain gauges on the crank to measure your torque. So it's one of the few sports that you could actually correlate oxygen intake to power output, which is something I've proposed for the last 10 years as a way of controlling doping, because it's truly, if you see your numbers, there's a certain amount of O2 oxygen you can take in, utilize, and you'll see that repeatedly. Even today, we could actually take somebody's power output, transmit it via an iPhone to a server, download it, or at least the officials could be looking at it live.
What would you see as some other, more market-based applications of
Power?
Yeah, power.
Well, power watts are kind of absolute, and I think it's one of those numbers that you could actually put a value on, and strength training, health, monitoring your health. I think it's great for me now. When I look back, I have still use a similar crank, but I could see what my values were when I was 20. I wish I would have had it prior to, say, my hunting accident, prior to 1993, because I would have been able to look at it and say, this is where I was at my best. This is where I was before I raced. And when I got shot, I lost, 40 pounds worth of muscle mass, right lung collapse. And I started racing when I wasn't even prepared for it. And it created this yo-yo effect of overtraining. And had I had that, I'd have trained just to the point where I knew where my physical capabilities were right to go into racing. And it's relevant now. I mean, it's widely adapted right now by a lot of riders, but I find it's a weird, and I hear these industry issues. The bike industry is, it's such a traditional model, and nobody's really come at it from a different perspective, but it's still an equipment supplier to the shop, who's your real customer, and then it's a place that people come in and gather, but as a company, you're going to depend on how good that salesman is, how good that interaction with the customer is, and even right now, today, there's a conflict to me. People are paying $400 to get positioned in a bike shop, supposedly using technology. And I find it's ridiculous. You could actually use the web as a way to give away positioning. It's kind of a science, kind of art. But, and I just see, just on, how riders, actually the cycling coach, when I was cycling riders and their coaches with power output, even the top pros really don't understand the simplicity of training and using power. And I see it kind of it's the physiologist trainers, that's how they make their living. They want to have a rider pay them $3,000 a month. This way it keeps them employed, and you could actually give that to people.
Now, I want to get into sort of some of the things, broader applications of the cycling industry, into mass transportation and some of the conversations that we've had before. But just before that, I know you're a really competitive person. And I know this not because I've ridden bicycles with you, but because I've played Wii tennis with you. So,
I'm mellowed now.
And maybe
when you get out of
Wii
shape,
bowling
you're tired.
with you. But, coming from that background, you launched your bicycle company. What are the synergies, the complements, and sort of the I guess the word I want to say is sort of the discords between coming from your background as a professional cyclist and actually being an entrepreneur?
Well, you said a lot there. My company, I went on retirement. I started that in '86, and I had a choice to actually continue it or do a licensing deal with Trek Corporation, and which I thought it was a good business decision to do it with via licensing. I just got done with racing and to build a team and build a company, and it was actually fried from cycling physically at the end of my career. So I went into that, and I realized even a licensing agreement it only worked for so long. There's always an interest on, I realized that they were just using my brand, Gary Fisher, to plug in between their dealers. And I never got what the potential should have been. We were still one of the top 4 road bike brands in the U.S., but my name's recognized worldwide. I think I sold 10,000 worth of bikes in France, where I'm definitely more popular there than the U.S. And so I saw this huge conflict and a lot of complications for that. But it's good for me right now because I do have an established brand and name recognition. And if you think of the bike industry, Specialized, Trek, all these big companies, they cannot even consider going direct. Their customers, the bike shop. They're not thinking of the end user. And there's one company in Europe that's going direct, Canyon. They're very successful. I don't believe it's going to be a totally direct. I think there's going to be kind of a retail interaction in key dealers and then a direct model. But that's what we're starting our company with and looking at it as the end user, the consumer.
So, in terms of values and just the drive, you hear about that entrepreneurial passion. So do you find some of that crossing over from your professional racing days into what you're doing right now?
It's way harder.
It's way harder. Okay. So every entrepreneur in here
cycling
has
was
essentially
beautiful
won the Tour de France, is what you're
No,
saying.
cycling was beautiful because it was, you get recruited in team, and I have to say, like with a pro team, it's like a small company, but they're established, and even today, it doesn't matter what I work with, I don't have the same structure and efficiency of like they have it dialed. You just wake up, you don't think of anything, get on the bike, race. You never have to worry about your bike. You don't have to worry about anything. And it's a team sport. It's very dynamic, and the riders are all professional. We all know what we need to do. So right now, even, with this new company, I'm still, I have all these ideas. I'm trying to find people that could match or kind of come along with ideas that might be not in the traditional bike model. And that's really difficult, especially in an industry that almost anybody you hire is coming from that traditional model. So even we have a great head of sales, and he's awesome. He's kind of transformed from thinking, okay, this is what we have to do, the dealers first, this is how we're going to do it, to saying, okay, we can still have key dealers that buy along with what our plan is, but if they don't, then we don't want to be with them. We want people to become partners.
So, crossover, and this may seem a little off the wall, but we're getting there. So, crossover, cycling, and the integration of technology and software. What do you see coming down the road?
Well, yeah, I think almost everything has. You got to have software. You have to have a software background, because if you talk, cycling's been very mechanical, but what's out there right now is cycling computers. The big deal right now is electric bikes, and it's a huge growing market. I think 200 million Chinese ride electric bikes. The German There was at the bike show in Germany, and 20% of Germans said they'll be buying an electric bike in the next 5 years. And it's supposed to be one of the fastest growing transportation sectors for the next 20 years. And it is. If you go to Amsterdam, you go to some of these other countries where they've adopted bikes, it's the best way to get around town. It's the best way to handle growth. But the electric bikes are, using battery. You're using, and I'm looking at the rider assist electric bikes, and that's where if you have software and you understand the torque and the idea is the electric bike's like having a bionic. It's like a bionic extension of your body, and to make that feel really good is software, and it's how you're even shifting, how it's kind of automatic shifting. But that's where that's what's going to even separate some of the. There's going to be the market that's going to go like a moped where it just turns on and it goes. And there's going to be people, I believe that for bringing people into the sport of cycling, electric bikes are going to be a huge thing. And it's right now in the bike shops, they don't even want to think of it. It's not pure. But I had a little quote when I was a kid, and somebody asked me, well, what is it like? Does it get easier when you get stronger? I said, no, you just go faster. And same thing with a bike. What feels great about a bike is inertia. It's the momentum. It's the speed. It's the sensory stuff that comes at you. And an electric bike gives that to people who aren't in shape. And almost everybody, my wife, anybody who doesn't ride a bike, the first thing they think of is that hill. They don't want to go up that hill. And an electric bike, it's amazing. I think once you go electric, you never go back. It's like, but that's software, and then it's interesting. I look at all the there's I think a representative from Strava, and Strava's been an amazing company where they've created this virtual. I mean, they're racing. It's using the GPS, cell phone or GPS, and they're tracking each other's. I could ride up a climb and see where I stand over anybody else who rode up that climb. I hope they didn't hold onto a car or anything, but. But you can actually, people are getting out and they're able to compete against themselves, and they're putting their data up in the cloud. And that's the same with, there's training services where you're downloading all your heart rate, all your training programs. But
you actually see like a healthcare sector opportunity in that? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think it's all it'll all tie together. There's so many things out there, so many apps. I couldn't even begin to figure out all of them that are practical. I'm wanting to work on, and we will be working on kind of a method of just using wattage a number. It's like weight training. People go into they go and lift weights. They know that they lifted 100 pounds, 10 reps last week, and if they are not able to do that, that they're not recovered. And the idea of physiology and training is you should be making incremental improvement all the time. But your body's very efficient. 6 weeks after one exercise, it starts to plateau out. But I started using this power output strain gauge technology, and this was pretty cool because I had a Dutch trainer, and we were sending my data over a modem in '93, and then he would send back that day. He would send me a training program for the next day. So and that's what that's kind of still hasn't been really adapted that much. And you still train remotely, but it's still not widely adapted.
So when you're talking to an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you get some questions about this, and they ask you about the entrepreneurial vision, what are some of the pointers that you give them?
It's like some kid coming to me at 17 said he wants to win the tour, and I said, "Whoa, that's a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff." I'm struggling right now to, I had a fitness company I started. There's been a bunch of little businesses I've started, but I'm struggling to kind of, not struggling. I'm finding, trying to get people that actually are embracing kind of a new way of doing things. And I think, it's just trying to select people. Once you find a really good person, you got to figure out how to keep them. And we're really in the, we're 6 months old, 7 months old, so we're in that.
But you've gone through some, you've been sort of at the peak, and then you've gone through some of the very same things that maybe even some of the entrepreneurs in the room have gone through in terms of, actively being in the process of fundraising and things like that. So what's that process like? you know, I mean, one perspective is from the entrepreneur that's starting his first business, and another is a perspective from somebody that's won the Tour de France a handful of times, and you know, but still doing the same function of fundraising. So
Yeah, I'm at a weird position because I had an established brand that had sales, so I have a whole bunch of, you know, a lot of pent-up demand for product, and so I'm actually like, I can have a hard good product. I want to get more into software, and but from just starting a company, I've had, you know, raising funding. I kind of want to, because I have an existing product that we're trying to get. We have sales already. We're trying to build that up and then go out and raise money. But it's if I could have my wish, I'd be raising funding right now for a more advanced leapfrogging. That's what we're planning on doing, because there's a big opportunity for us to go outside of the traditional distribution model. And you know, it's fun. It's going to be fun, especially if you look. I said there's one company in the industry that's being successful selling online, and it's very hard for a company to start, a young company with no brand name. They have to start totally from scratch. How do you even, like, a brand is very hard to get, and it can be destroyed by people, but usually like, brand is what has long staying power, and if you can execute what the brand represents with the product, you can be successful. But it takes building a great team around you. I know that I'm not a CEO. That's what I've realized. That's why I said I don't really have a title, because I'm thinking of too many things. I'm not a day-to-day
okay,
manager.
so as the founder of a company, then how do you interact with, you know, how do you determine what your function is within the organization, steering the vision and handing, you know, the execution over, or getting somebody on your team that can execute?
You got to admit your weaknesses, and I'm really good at that. So you know, I'm trying to find people that actually would make up the, you know, I know I want, you know, we're looking for a CEO, but we're not ready right now. We will be, but just complementing your strengths. I'm a design guy. I mean, when my fitness company started in 2001, and it came out of Stairmaster. It was a very traditional strength equipment, and their idea was doing everything in-house. We had brought in 5 engineers. I bought this out of a bankruptcy, and so I unfortunately brought in kind of the old industry, but they wanted to create everything inside, and I haven't seen any good designs in the fitness industry. And I knew some people at IDEO, and we went down, and it costs us a lot more, but we had product that, you know, is still way advanced in any other design. I sold that company last year, but I like the idea of going outside for a lot of stuff, because design is, I'd love to build it. I am trying to build a team of design-oriented people that are, it's about design, it's about branding, marketing, and if you can integrate some of the technology seamlessly where you don't have to pay attention to it, it's just part of it, then.
So how do you balance, you know, I mean, I know you guys just relaunched your bicycle company a couple months ago, and they look really cool, and I'm expecting, you know, mine in the mail any day. I've been looking for that in the mail. But how do you, you know, balance executing what you've got right now and knowing that you have a vision for something that maybe even leapfrogs exactly what you're doing right now? So how do you balance the two?
Well, the hard part is it's not like it's software. Bike industry, you still have a bicycle as a platform, and right now, 98% of the bikes are produced in Asia, and a small company like me, I'd have to go in there and be in line with $800 billion companies, and so I've been looking at, you know, different companies to either source my product or actually one to buy that's has some of the best technology for making carbon fiber bikes, but they're struggling. They need somebody to come in and kind of rescue them, and it's an opportunity to control some of our manufacturing, but it's almost like controlling the top end of it, where you can implement ideas into it, and you still might have to go to Asia for sourcing, or Mexico for sourcing if you could do that. But the bike industry is either hard goods, nobody's actually blended software with bikes. And that's what I'm trying to do, and and we'll do it if we surround ourselves with the right people. I mean, I said everything's going to be I look at the bike as a cockpit
Well,
for
so
all this other
I
stuff.
think it goes back to a conversation much earlier about wearables, right? I mean, in a sense, a bike is something, you don't think, I mean, you think about wearing something on your wrist, but I mean, if you're talking about all this technology on a bicycle, it's almost, in the same category, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say where it's. I say technology in cycling is going to come either from the manufacturing of automation of carbon fiber, a little more automation, and then electronic shifting, embedded lights. Right now, a huge deal is safety. A lot of people getting hurt on bikes. There's a New York Times article or Wall Street Journal article about it's almost legal to kill bicyclists because you hit somebody on a bike and one blames the other, but there's POV, point of view cameras that are actually able to defend the rider. A lot of riders are obnoxious too. They're sometimes at fault, but it is a difference between being in a car and a bike is huge. But so all that technology in cycling is it's an environment that does kind of embrace technology at the top end. The secret is making it available for everybody.
Great. Well, I want to open it up for a couple of questions if we have some from the audience. Right over here, microphone. We got to get better at that. Aki. I'll get you some.
Hello. This is going to be a bit controversial, but I'm curious about your take. Some of the most innovative things from life have come from war, from people trying to kill other people, radar. And I wanted to ask you if you think if what Lance Armstrong did would eventually be able to be used in a positive way. Because in the end, he was trying to be innovative with the substance he was taking, trying to have a better edge on the sport, and he did so, making, obviously not playing by the rules, but he obviously was very innovative on the methods of winning. Do you think that anything of what he did would eventually be able to be used on a good way?
Well, medicine's good. I mean, EPO could save people's lives, and it's more about rules. It is not, if you read about it, you understand what I've known was that it's not about being competitive and having a level playing field. He went one above that. He was bribing officials not to even be controlled, tested. So that's a whole different thing. And then when people started questioning it, he threatened, it became almost a criminal action rather than another rider just trying to keep up. I watched riders who, are just trying to keep up, and they were just, if they were even rumors or caught, they were treated like criminals. And so I saw the contrast that was just so great. Of course, the medication some of the medication is beneficial to health. I mean, it doesn't mean it's because you can't take testosterone as a cyclist doesn't mean that somebody in their 50s or 60s could not benefit from it. It's not about the drugs, it's about rules. And I try to equate it to kind of like if you're got an investment fund or you're an entrepreneur starting a company and there's regulations around it that you can't really get around. There's government regulations, but you figure out how to pay off somebody and you get free reign on how you want to operate. I kind of compared it to a nonprofit. I remember reading about a book. What is it? The company. It's a nonprofit, but they basically put all the bookstores out of business in England, but they use their nonprofit status to drive that business. And that's kind of like if you were a company you had zero tax implications, no taxes, that'd drive a lot of profits to go and build your business against your competition. And I don't think that'd be fair for somebody else that's trying to compete who is paying their taxes. And that's really what it was like. He was not, let's just say he wasn't, there were a lot of other people cheating and doing that. So it became, and I would say that Armstrong was kind of a victim of a corrupt culture that started, some could say a long time ago. It was really started in the early mid-'90s by a couple of scientists, doctors that came in and, knew how to beat the system. And that's, you think about it, it's maybe part of competition, but getting busted is also part of competition. It's like speeding. You can speed if you want, but if you get caught, you get enough speeding tickets, your insurance goes up, and you end up not speeding. So it's kind of, that's a little bit what I would equate it to.
Do we have another question? We're running way over here, so.
It's been a long day.
Well, thank you, Greg, so much for joining us, and thank you for coming down to the Tech
Thank you,
Talks,
Robert.
and I hope you enjoy the rest of the week.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now we are going to do something a little bit different and give all of you the chance to, instead of just listening, to participate. So we're going to break out into our 3 workshops. I have noticed that some of you did not sign up for a workshop, but these are the 3 options. The session on investors will remain in this room, and it will be led by Mike Maples, Ariel Polar, and Mike Hennessy. The session on entrepreneurs will be in the upstairs room where many of you picked up your bags yesterday, just into the lobby, and it will be on on design, on the issues of design, and it'll be led by Jeremy Alexis and Rebecca Lepone. And then the executive session, which is a smaller group, one-on-one, will be inside of the Tao boardroom, which is just behind the session over the divider over here. That may be full if you haven't signed up already. We've got about 8 to 10 spaces in that particular one, and that'll be on for executives looking to examine their digital strategies. So we will break those sessions at 5:30 promptly, and so you've got 45 minutes. Let's get started.
Sí, entrevista. Aquí se sientan, lo van a grabar en vivo. Si quieres, apaga las bocinas. No, he's just got a series of questions. So have a seat.
Like 3 questions, really quick ones, like 5 minutes.
And you got to take a microphone though, because
Okay.
that's the only.
It's basically an interview for the streaming. It's not
I'll give you the signal when they're.
and it's really quick questions. Actually, it's basically what are your plans regarding the electric bikes business?
Okay.
I mean, you saw it as a business opportunity. So do you have any plans in this?
Yeah,
Share.
it's a competitive. But yeah.
And then, how does the Mexican market fit in your plans? Would you consider investing in Mexico regarding this business? Something like that. It's really quick. Exact manufacturing, or research, or selling it.
Yeah, I mean, even for one product that we're making right now for trainers, made in
The microphone.
Okay.
We're study started yet.
Well,
No, we were just talking.
I was hoping everybody.
they won't leave, but it's not going to be loud. It's just going to be on
Yeah.
the live stream part. So.
Hello.
You tell me. Yeah, we were just chatting before.
It's done.
Okay.
Hello.
You got to hold them up.
Yeah,
You're
perfect.
gonna hear it.
Okay. Oh, good.
Well,
Good.
thank you very much, Greg, for having me again.
No,
letting
thank
me
you.
interview you again. And I would like to ask you. You just mentioned in your lecture that you see a business opportunity in the electric bikes sector. What are your plans regarding this business?
Well, I see an opportunity because it's actually happening, but I'm actually excited about it because I actually think I've ridden enough electric bikes to realize this is really fun, and it's once people get to try a really great design one and one that feels like a bike, you're going to get people just kind of jumping over. But I get excited about just new ideas and new ways to kind of bring. It actually comes down to design. A lot of electric bikes right now are designed by city bikes, almost like transportation bikes, which is a big deal, but they're even coming from the motorcycle side. So there's nothing really there it's thinking about the more enthusiasts, cyclist enthusiasts. I still think design is a real key factor in terms of making it very easy to use. There's going to be
And sexy as well, right?
Sexy. That's design. Yeah, sexy. That's
right
why I
now, at least here in Mexico, electric bikes that we have, most of them made in Mexico, they look chunky.
Yeah,
they look
exactly
heavy.
They're heavy. They are. They're 40, 60 pounds. I have an electric bike that's 20 pounds. It's actually just a slight electric assist right now, but I think as batteries get lower, and there's some stuff that we're actually talking to a company that might have kind of where we're able to recharge the battery without plugging it in, because battery is the huge weight. But already now the motors that are being made out there are being made smaller, lighter, but there's still there's two. It's almost like there's one market right now which is mass market, either cheap ones or ones that are made for people who just commute. And there's a huge market for people that are wanting to do it for fitness, for fun, for sport, and that's the market I'd like to be in.
Do you have any specific plans yet, or you just?
I'll have prototypes done, and I'm gonna have bikes to the market within the next year.
Perfect.
I could use off-the-shelf stuff right now, which it still takes a good 12 months to really take a bike from concept to production, and we're working right now on production.
Okay.
But no, that's going to be part of my long-term plan. That's where I think in America, I think that's where it's going to be kind of a struggle in the beginning, but once it adopts it, I think people will get enthused. It'll be kind of another growth phase, I think, in cycling.
And how does Mexico fit in your plans? And I mean, right now you said that you're working on prototypes and working in production, but do you see Mexico as an interesting market for you?
I already have equipment made in Taiwan, and which that's kind of the center of the bike industry, mainly because they invested a lot in carbon fiber manufacturing, and it's where a lot of the components are made. But now they've gone to China, so you're going 2 layers, and China's not decreasing in cost. And I think there's an issue with, like I said, if I'm going to get into this, at least on my top end bikes, I'm going to have to compete against all these competitors. And carbon fiber, if you do it right and you design it right, you can compete against the big players on a higher level product. But I think that could come down with better techniques of manufacturing. And ideally, I'd like to have the supply closer, because right now that's really what you are as a bike company. You're a big bank, so you're financing the manufacturer, you're financing the components, you're financing the shipping, you're financing the bike shop. So you're talking about 1.5 years of funding to get a product from start to finish. And if you cut that supply chain, so if we're making, we are really wanting to come to Mexico for multiple products, and we're looking at either U.S. to start some of the potentially a factory to produce, not a huge volume, but I think we want to consider Mexico as actually probably as a priority.
Perfect.
Because I've been to Mexico. I know that there's some great artisans. There's great skilled labor. There's great product made here, and it's so close. I mean, I can look at it as another state for me. I'm close to.
It's what's happening with the automobile manufacturing.
Yeah.
So many factories.
I was in Japan last month, and I met. He's a friend of mine that's the architect for a potential Toyota plant.
Wow.
I probably shouldn't even say that, but I believe there's Toyota. There's a couple people, big car companies coming here.
Yeah, BMW as well next year probably. And finally, the last question, Greg. For you, which is the most disruptive technology applied to sports that you've know of? I mean, the single most, not only on cycling, it can be on cycling, but which is...
If it's in cycling, I think, it's been some components. I actually don't think there's been any real disruptive stuff. If you're talking competition aerodynamics, if you're talking I think what's really cool when I talk about being able to measure your power output, so you're able to measure your real performance day to day and then make decisions on training the following day based upon, if you're not recovered, you're just not going to attain the level that you've seen even the week before.
Okay.
But it's, I think the big disruptive deal is going to be the way a product's distributed and how right now the companies that are winning are consumer, they're thinking about the end consumer, the end user.
Okay.
And that's what I'm trying to build as a company that's, because I'm a consumer, and I always think of what do I want, how do I want it delivered, and I'm kind of the type, I like to go in shops. I think Apple's always, I hate to use them as a model, but they have a retail space. They have people that, you know, they're not over aggressive. You go in there, you know, you might look at it online, you might go in there, you might buy it online, but it's, you're having that interaction between online and retail. That's the opportunity in the bike industry.
Well, Greg, thank you very much for your time again.
Right,
and
thank you.
I'll send you that story once we run it.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
thank
you.
you, thank
I'm
you.
gonna, yeah, thank you. I said I'm going to have Robin translate everything for me.